Hey all, this is Kevin Getch here with Webfor. I'm super excited today. We're kind of giving you a 2-for-1 special today with the Webfor Marketing Podcast, and we've been doing this podcast for a while and mainly have one guest on. And today we wanted to bring on two both amazing people at Webfor, and we have a great topic we're going to be talking about today as well. So we have Michael Cortez as well as Jake Morley, and I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourselves. Michael, you want to give a quick introduction?
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. I'm Michael Cortez. I'm the marketing manager over here at Webfor. I enjoy SEO and E.A.T, which is a concept we'll be talking about today, expertise, authority, and trust for Google. And yeah, looking forward to another awesome Webfor Marketing Podcast. Jake, you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. So as Michael said, my name is Jake. I'm an SEO specialist here at Webfor. This is my first time being on here, so I'm really excited. I've been doing digital marketing for about 9 years, where I truly found my passion for SEO specifically during this endeavor. And I guess my favorite parts of SEO are on-page SEO and keyword research specifically, but I really get excited about all things SEO.
Awesome. And this topic today it's a really interesting one because it's a conceptual topic that Google uses, and a lot of experts in the industry always look at it and try to determine and really understand, well, how are they utilizing it? And first, before we get into, we talked a little bit, Michael alluded to, we're going to be talking about EAT today. And so not eating, which, I'm getting hungry now, but we're talking about EAT, which is expertise, authority, and trust. And so Michael, I'll start out with Michael, and then Jake, if you want to add anything to this, let's kind of explain and if you can try to give a simplistic overview for those people who maybe aren't SEO experts and kind of have that knowledge, like what is EAT, and then like how is that like when we're talking about this, we're just to provide context, I always got to remember we're talking about search engines. We're talking about how search engines rank content, how your content can kind of get into the search engines and rank well. So in relation to that, what is EAT, Michael?
Yeah. EAT is, as you said, kind of an interesting topic in the SEO community, and I'd say hotly debated a little bit as far as people have different understandings of what it is. But EAT was introduced by Google in 2015 in the quality rater guidelines, and if we'll talk more about that in a little bit. If you look at the quality rater guidelines, it's mentioned quite frequently throughout it in different areas. But really what EAT is a quality score for Google. So they use different data points to basically assess the quality score of an overall site, an author, publisher, and then basically score it based on how authoritative and how much of an expert and how much they trust that author or that website. So EAT is a concept where you typically see it a little more. It's for industries that are what's considered your money, your life, which we'll get to that later too, like medical and stuff. You see EAT come into play a bit more when you're talking about YMYL topics. So we'll touch on that later. I'm just breaking all sorts of news way too early here. So
yeah. And Jake, what is there anything else you have to add to that? I know Michael kind of dove pretty deep and kind of covered a lot of things, but is there any other, I guess, vantage points you have on that you want to share?
I think really the main point that I want to point out there, I guess, is that it helps Google distinguish, obviously, sites and weed out the non-knowledgeable sites or the less valuable, right? So I think in doing that really helps, especially as Michael alluded to the YMYL, which we'll get to here soon. But that specifically could really hurt you if you got the bad advice that some of these sites could potentially provide unknowingly. So we'll kind of get into that here soon. But it's very important.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because a lot of people don't a lot of people were thinking about how do I get into the rank, but not realizing that this is also to keep out a lot of the stuff that's just low quality in there as well. And so it's kind of a spectrum of low quality to kind of high quality and meeting these general guidelines and getting those out there. So I'm sorry, Michael, were you going to say something?
Yeah, and maybe it would be good for us to kind of give a little bit more of a definition of each of the areas of E.A.T. So expertise, authority, and trust. I'm not sure if we want to actually call out. Yeah. So expertise, the E in E.A.T, right, is looking at the notoriety of an author. So how authoritative is an author for that given topic, for that given subject, right? So a lot of factors. What type of podcast, video content, blog content has that author published in the past, right? So that's a big portion of the expertise assessment. The authority assessment is, which is the A in E.A.T, is more of a site-wide quality score, as well as an author quality score for looking at how authoritative is the site. That could be based on link signals, that could be based on quality of content, a number of factors, authors, and how authoritative is this author. That could be based on things like how much is this author published on this document or this topic, how quality is the author's content, how much is the author referenced throughout the web, and how notable are they throughout the web. Almost made up my own word there. And then trust is really just the credibility of an author or a website. So how credible is the brand or the author in Google's eyes? So that's really those three factors when we're talking about expertise, authority, and trust, just diving in a little deeper there.
Yeah, I tend to think of things in like real life situations, and if you were trying to assess information, like for anything, like you're trying to assess information, there's a certain process to go about that to understand, is this person that I'm talking to, like if you're taking in information, you have different ways of kind of understanding whether it's valid, good information, because you're looking at the source of that information, like what you know about them, like what others, like their standing in the community. So there's all those different elements that kind of come into play with just real life situations. And what I think is cool about it is Google is trying to take that same concept and create an algorithmic approach for it, which you mentioned earlier, the quality rater guidelines, which a lot of people don't know what those are. So if we could kind of talk a little bit about quality rater guidelines, and I guess for those who don't know, I'll give a little bit of context just so you understand what that is. And then Michael, maybe you can go into a little more detail, explain how that actually impacts search results, whether it impacts them directly or indirectly, how it's like actually utilized. And so for those that don't know, there's a program that Google has where they have live people that go in and basically look at search results and go through a process of rating those search results. And they have this huge 160-page document. We can maybe link it in the show notes or do something like that. There's this huge document that is the guidelines for those quality raters, which a lot of us in the SEO community look at that and say, hey, this is a great tool to utilize to kind of think about like how they're saying what's the quality of the page, right? And there's all these different details, and E.A.T is mentioned, as Michael said before. E.A.T's mentioned throughout there multiple times. And so Michael, when someone goes in and you have a quality rater that actually goes in and is rating, maybe they ended up on your webpage, they're rating it. Are they manually going in and saying this should rank higher or this should rank lower, and that's changing it on Google? Or are they just providing feedback that's more like I went to a restaurant and here's some feedback on this one specific thing, and it doesn't really impact things directly?
That's a great question, Kevin, and it's definitely the latter. But ultimately, Google quality raters, right, the feedback they're providing to Google really helps Google understand what changes they're making if they're making search experience better, right? So that's the key to it. But on top of that, if they're on top of understanding if they're making the search experience more useful, the Google quality raters are also responsible for understanding the quality of a website, right? Is it a high quality domain? Is it a low quality domain? And then Google is able to basically compare their algorithmic assessments versus the manual assessments of the quality raters to make sure that their algorithm is appropriately scoring the quality of a domain based on a number of factors, right? And all these factors are called out in the quality rater guidelines, from low quality content to HTTP to authorship and a number of factors. So they're essentially scoring it and providing feedback to Google based on the quality of domain and the quality of the search experience as a whole, and improvements Google's making throughout that process.
Yeah, and they're not. And I mean, when you go through that, it's an pretty exhaustive list, which I have always said is hugely valuable tool for us in the community to look at that and do the same ourselves and reverse engineer it basically and say, hey, if they're mentioning right here, like they're clearly calling out brand authority, they're calling out author authority, they're calling out the way the page is structured from a user experience standpoint, like all those things are very clear in that quality rater guidelines. And I think I love that. And it's one of the few things you actually get directly from the source of Google that's like, hey, here's how we look at it. Right. I think that's just a huge aspect. And there's so many different nuggets in there. But you started talking about, at the very beginning, you started talking about how E.A.T played a role in Google search, the expertise and breaking that down a little bit more, authority and trust and breaking that down a little bit more. And I think there's so much more there that we can provide. And we for our clients, we go into this deep dive because when you're thinking about search, a big part of it is basically developing your thought leadership and core topic categories and really building that out in a very, very strategic, structured way so that you're becoming the thought leader, that you basically are creating that expertise, authority, and trust around that topic by providing high value content. So, and Jake or Michael, feel free to jump in and kind of touch on different things or add different things. But as a general rule of thumb, what is E.A.T's role in Google search? Like a little more deeper dive than what you already went into.
E.A.T is, Jake, did I?
Well, I was thinking maybe, would we need to maybe go over YML first to kind of explain the importance of some of those factors?
It plays a big part. I mean, I think it's good to provide that context. So here I'll touch on it, and I know we had that in the agenda later to dive deeper into your money, your life. But YMYL stands for your money, your life queries, right? And I mean, all kinds of things. Like, what are some of the different industries that represents, Jake, as far as your money, your life?
Yeah, so health and wealth, anything from medical, could be, dentistry, doctors, veterinarian care, and then any financial advice. So whether that's, telling you where to invest or anything that, could affect your monetary income or lose, right?
Yeah.
So, so a wide spectrum there where you obviously would need somebody who is authoritative and has the expertise and trust, surrounding those areas. Otherwise, you could really make a huge mistake if you followed incorrect information.
Yeah, it's when you're relying on Google search results for certain things, and that's basically, these are like their high priority items. Your money, your life, right? Those are your money and your life are two very high priority items, and there's a lot of these different kind of acronyms in Google search, like QDF, query deserves freshness, which comes into play in this as well. But it's having the your money, your life, at least context is important to understand why Google's looking at this so closely. So with that context, Michael, why don't you expand a little bit into that, maybe using that as a little bit of a framework to say, here's these situations where this really plays out even more.
Yeah, I can touch on how the role EAT plays in search and kind of where it comes into the ranking process and all of that. I also have a GIF or not a GIF, but an image that Google shared from Danny Sullivan. So I want to share that. But the last tidbit on YMIYL is when you're talking about those topics, the health and wealth and all those areas that Jake and Kevin were mentioning. So there's a higher quality threshold for those topics that it's expected than the rest of non-YMYL content, right? So Google's being extra scrutinous when they're looking at that content to make sure that it meets those high quality thresholds and that they're not spreading misinformation, as Kevin and Jake were mentioning. So that's a key part of that assessment process when it's going through the algorithms and deciding if it's going to be indexed and ranked and all of that stuff. So, but circling back to each role in search, there's a number of factors where it comes into play, and I'm going to share this image first from Google, straight from their mouths. Let's see if I can find
straight
it.
from the horse's mouth is always
horse's
interesting.
Mouth. Thank you, Kevin.
Straight from the horse's mouth. It's like, really? Like, I've never seen a horse talk, but okay. Anyways, sorry.
Everything.
So Danny Sullivan from Google here mentioning, is EAT a ranking factor? Well, not if you mean the technical thing, like they can measure directly, but if you're talking about a variety of signals, such as link signals, such as content signals, author signals, even security signals like HTTPS, they use a variety of signals as a proxy to tell if content matches EAT as humans would assess it. And once again, tying it back to the quality rater guidelines, in that regards, yes, it's a ranking factor. So that's straight from the horse's mouth there.
So actually, this is an example live of EAT, right? So for those who don't know, because there's going to be some people who are like, who's Danny Sullivan? Not in the industry. In the industry, everyone knows Danny Sullivan, right? But for those who don't know, like, why does he have such high trust? And why are you trusting what he's saying here?
Yeah. No, he is. He's an ex-SEO who since has became a Google on the Google team, right? And now he's a Google. I'm trying to think of the actual team he's on, but he's with John and them as far as communicating changes to search and all of that fun stuff. So he's a highly authoritative and trusted individual in the SEO community because he is one of the individuals that communicates major search changes to the SEO community and the digital marketing community. So yes, that is definitely a great example in real time of EAT and why you can trust certain content versus over other content, right? But really, EAT plays a factor in the quality assessment when you're going through the algorithmic process. So it's coming in a number of ways, whether that's PageRank or the Panda algorithm assessing content, right? So off-page signals, but really after the content is scored using the traditional document scoring methods like the information retrieval and document scoring, it is then passed through a quality signal assessment, right? The EAT assessment to understand if the content meets the quality threshold. So it has been confirmed by Google that they use it in the ranking process for organic content. It's also heavily involved when you're talking about like any of the featured snippets or any of the, if you're talking about rich snippets, if you're talking about review stars, if you're talking about FAQ snippets, all of that entity matching and the authorship and the quality assessment is happening during that ranking process as well, that algorithmic process. And then you also see EAT play a role in this has been confirmed by Google too, things like Google News, Google Discover. You have to have a high quality, high level of trust to earn your way into Discover results, into news results. So really you're seeing EAT come into search in a number of different ways in that assessment of the quality thresholds, essentially, right in line with when they're doing the ranking of content. So yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think, I find it so, I think it goes back to like some of the foundational elements of history of kind of search and some of the advancements they made back to Hummingbird when they first started being able to really understand entities, people, places, things, and to be able to make those connections and semantic connections between all those things. And what's funny is if you understand how we process things in the brain and we make these connections in the brain to all these different things, it's very much trying to mirror the same kind of thing where it's like you have this concept and it's like once you have these little strings and you attach this string to this concept, it's like, okay. And you're doing the same thing with entities, with concepts where it's like this entity, this brand is known for sportswear, right? So it's like you just attach this relational meaning, but then you have people that are working there, and then you have athletes that work under that brand, and so it starts creating. And that's why when we see these things in the Google search graph, and you're seeing the sports, like players for different sports teams, and then you it's just, to me, it's just amazing the ability to be able to do that and contextualize all of that. And and so it starts with that, but then as you get to that point where it's like, okay, we're trying to continually advance our ability to provide. And the way the short context I provide for people usually is, imagine you're referring people, like you're referring your friends, your customers, your family, whoever, to this business, but they're not having a good experience. How long are you going to do that for? Probably not very long, right? So it's important that you think about Google in the same way, that these are their customers and they're referring them to you and to these other businesses. And so their whole goal is, how do we make sure that we're referring them, understanding the context of what they're looking for, which is a whole nother thing as far as understanding the query and the intent behind the query, and then matching that to the millions of documents that are out there, and then being able to, because they've already categorized those and framed those and kind of structured them together to have this kind of relational meaning. And then to be able to pull those up real time, when sometimes they also are layering in other things like query deserves freshness or your money, your life, right? Because when, say, like COVID first hit, and there's this brand new thing. And that's one of the things people don't often realize is with Google search, there's like 15% of the queries each day are brand new, right? There's all these things. And it's like, how is that possible? But it's like, so they've had to really create a lot to understand how to be able to process information that they haven't already kind of known and categorized. It's easy to work with the stuff you've already known, the queries you've already gotten, but this is brand new stuff. And so you start getting combinations of query deserves freshness because it's like, this is something brand new, and your money, your life, because this is health related. And that EAT process, as far as understanding who are authorities in this topic, who are the experts, and how do we know to trust them? It's kind of like if you're searching something related to a NASA launch, NASA should probably be a highly authoritative, consideration in that, right? So there's certain things to
not just based off the number
common
of
sense. What's that?
Not just off the number of times NASA
launch. I don't have a page that just says NASA launch. NASA launch 2022. NASA, and that was SEO back in the early 2000s. But it's so cool to see how far the algorithm has come, the understanding has come, and the quality has come. But it's still one of those things where we're still going like, oh, these still aren't, like, we're always trying to improve, right? And so, and I think that's what their goal is with EAT, is to get an even deeper understanding of who are the expert authors that relate to these publishers or brands. Sometimes they relate to multiple publishers and brands, and the brands and what are their overall topic. And so you just kind of create those semantic umbrella relationships, and everything's kind of connected. I think you might have talked about this before, but under like vectors and anyways, I was about to go down a whole nerd rap.
Like some based analysis. Well, yeah, essentially, what you're talking about, Kevin, is spot on, right? Their guide to their path to semantic SEO started pre-EAT, right? In the pandas, the penguins, the hummingbirds, right? That is where their understanding of they built the knowledge graph and entity connections, like you're talking about. That's really where it all began, and that was pre-EAT, and ultimately that helped them be able to understand at a deeper level, publishers, authors, and connections between entities and relationships between people and facts and things. And that's, kind of brought us to where we are today, as far as, introducing BERT and MUM and some of the even newer algorithms that are, specifically for addressing that 15% of unknown searches, right? Serving video content, image content, news results based on what the intent and kind of the meaning of the searches that users are typing in, like you're talking about. So yeah, that's a huge factor in E. It's absolutely tied together. Without those algorithm updates and the modern algorithm updates, they wouldn't be able to assess E and authorship and authorities and create those understandings, those connections like we do on a deep level like that. So that was crucial to the development of where we're at for E today.
So we talked a little bit about it, but how does it play a role in the actual ranking process? Which, and this is what I'd say a heavily debated area as well. But like, what are some of the more concrete factors that kind of play a role in the ranking process that contribute to displaying your expertise, to developing authority, to building trust? And feel free, whoever wants to jump in first and take that.
Yeah, I can share a few tips. I mean, like you mentioned, there's really it's debated, and depending on the source you read out there, some will say there's 30 different factors that they're looking at for E, and some are saying there's these 3 core factors, and some say it's just author pages. So there's a number of different ideas out there of how they're assessing E and assessing qualities at that level. But, once again, I think we can refer back to, if you want some things that are really kind of in stone here, we can refer back to the quality rater guidelines, and a lot of what's mentioned in there as some solid areas that they are using to assess E, right? So content quality, I'd say that's one of the top factors, right? So they're absolutely looking at the quality of the content and the accuracy of the content, right? Because that's a big piece of if they're going to deem a piece of content high quality or low quality, right? If it's not accurate, if it has misinformation, then that would definitely be considered lower quality content, right? There's a number of other factors there when it comes to content quality assessment. Also, page rank. So the backlink profile of both the piece of content, the website as a whole, and even that author can play a role here. So anchor text, the authoritative mentions of that brand or that website throughout the web, right? Those play a factor. And even some factors such as like HTTPS security, right? So Google's looking at, how secure a domain is, and they're considering that as far as a quality factor when they're assessing the overall quality of a domain, right?
It goes to trust quite a bit. Like if you have that, it just is a big trust factor right out the gate.
Yeah, and then something that's mentioned quite a bit that I haven't touched on that could be one of the top factors, if you ask me, is the authorship, right? So your author pages, your About Us pages, how clearly are you marking up your entities and the facts about your entities? How are you making those connections? Like Kevin's on the board of directors at SimPDX. Are we calling out those connections for Google to clearly understand them and build his authority, right? Also, does he have an author page that has all the awesome content he's published in the past for Google to be able to assess how much he's written on a certain subject or the corpus of documents he has out there, right? So really the author and About Us content is hugely important in the EAT scoring. So that's definitely a factor that many people agree on is one of the top things Google's looking at. So that's just a few. There's many more out there. Overall topical authority, or just how much you've written on a certain concept, right? And a number of other factors come into play here. But really, those are some of the top of mind that I would say for business owners, if you're actually looking on things to focus on. For EAT, build your building your E.A.T and then building your authority ultimately and helping your rankings. Those are some of the areas for business owners I would say that they should probably focus first and build a strong foundation before branching out in some of the other areas.
Yeah, I think specifically, a lot of times people are doing the SEO not even realizing that it's E. So you mentioned, like HTTP versus HTTPS, like that's just kind of some of your normal SEO checks and topical relevancy. You're not going to talk about car repair on a site that talks about, so an EAT subject such as a veterinarian. Like you're not going to just throw that on there and then Google's obviously going to see that as you're not an expert in that field. So there's a lot of overlap that a lot of people I don't think always see. But I guess my 2 cents here is I think a lot does go based off of the author. So the popularity of the author, if they have books published, time of the last publication, just a lot I think goes off of that, and any awards they have won, and really contributes to that.
Those are some great call outs, Jake. The date to last publish is like you could have someone who was a highly expert, like a high expert, they're authoritative, they're trusted, but they haven't written anything for the last 15, 20 years, right? And the topic has changed a lot in that time. So, maybe there's a lot that's changed, and depending on what it is, especially if you're talking about something to do with SEO,
that changes. Yeah,
they would not be an
monthly,
expert
daily,
anymore
weekly.
in SEO.
Yeah.
Right? If it's even in the technology or medical industry, there's things that they just change very quickly. So that how that query deserves freshness is kind of different than that to some extent. QDF goes more towards news, but it's still that same kind of idea of how the relevance and recency of that information that they're publishing. And I think I think a lot, like you mentioned, the awards. And if you start out with a brand, you start out in an individual, and you kind of use those things, right? And so you say you have a brand and you have a executive or person in that organization, regardless of their position, and they start to sitting on a board, and they start to get an award, and they start to be published, and they have all these things that happen. They're publishing on their site, but now they're also been published on Forbes. They've been published on these other sites. So all these co-occurrences and mentions related. So like we talk a lot about the distance to other trusted entities in both the link graph or just co-occurrence of brand or individual mentions of that author. And so you have all those things that kind of come into play, just like so everything to me relates back to real life. Like, how do you do this in real life? How do you build authority in real life? How do you build expertise in real life? How do you build trust in real life? Like, those things all translate to what we're doing on the web from this standpoint as well. And what a lot of people, I don't think, like if you're in the medical side, and you're publishing something, those little acronyms after your name, those will come into play, because it's like, those mean you have a master's degree. That's a huge sign of trust and authority and expertise, right? But that only goes to a certain level as far as like, oh, you got a master's degree, but now where are you there? So it's like all of those things come into play and are easy signals that Google can pick up to say, hey, like in this medical space, you have your master's degree, but as I start to understand, like I can also see you have your master's degree in this field and you're talking about this field. So like all those things come into play, right? And I find it so amazing. It's just very, very cool.
You both mentioned some great topics. As far as authors is huge here, right? Co-occurrence of author, the mentions of the author, just how notable is it? I almost made up my own word again. How notable is this author, right? And like you're saying, Kevin, it works the exact same in the real world as it does how Google's trying to assess it online. So it's very similar process to building your authority. So yeah,
I think
those are some great call outs.
I think one of the biggest differences that you don't see, though, it is there's other ways this happens, is links, right? So someone linking to your website,
Yeah.
we kind of refer to these general things, links, mentions, as endorsements, all these different testimonials, people talking about you and your brand, and there's kind of different levels of those endorsements, and links are a very powerful one for SEO. And so then you have it's a highly authoritative site is like, oh, this is huge, we got a link to our site from this. Well, they're in the veterinary industry, I'm in car repair, that's still authoritative link. But if it's a veterinary industry linking to, it's the Veterinary Industry Association linking to my veterinary website, and it's talking about, I'm not going to use the proper term here because I was about to say animal husbandry, and I'm like making sure I'm not saying something bad because it sounds like an interesting word. So I'm like, so they're linking to that, and someone's searching that. That's going to provide, because of it, both the authoritativeness and because it's highly relevant, and the content that's within the context of what they're talking about and linking to you. All those things come into play and link over here and say, like, they're linking to now you have a book, and maybe they're linking to your book on it, or your article that you wrote that's really in depth, and they're saying, hey, this is a great source to kind of check that out. And so that absolutely, that base foundation of citing, I mean, that was what Google was really built on. What was it? Backscratch? What was the original name of Google that they were coming up? It was like called Backscratch or something like that. I forget.
It sounds familiar, but yeah.
Before they called it Google, they were thinking of coming up with something like Backscratch or something like that, because it was
when they invented in college, right?
Yeah. It was like, because it's this person is endorsing this person over here, and so their original algorithm was all built on links, and it's still a big portion of it. So that comes into play as well. But
back rub.
What's that?
Back rub.
Back rub. That's what it was. I was like back scratch.
Close. Yeah, you almost got it. But yeah, no, that's interesting. Yes, link still plays a huge role in still the E.A.T process and the ranking process as a whole. So.
You mentioned E.A.T scores and like the ratings. How is there like everyone always is like, how do we game this? But how do those ratings work? Like, how do E.A.T ratings work? And is there any way to kind of contextualize that for people to provide more value?
So the E.A.T ratings work kind of like we've mentioned, looking at those number of factors like we were just talking about, from link scores to author scores to content signals, off-page signals, all of these different factors, and really assessing the quality of it, right, through that expertise, authoritativeness, and trust signals that we've been alluding to, right? After the traditional ranking process occurs, right? After the traditional document scoring and just traditional organic ranking process, right? Then there's a quality assessment, assessing those factors like we were just talking about: links, anchor text, mentions of an author, right? Content quality, HTTPS, and really the factors could go on and on, but that's really where you're seeing E.A.T play a big role in the process. You mentioned the scores of E.A.T, which to me is interesting because I think this is a subject that, and Jake, if you had something to add to that, please stop me at any time. I think this is an interesting concept because there's also not necessarily clarity across the industry on an E.A.T score, right? That's a big question I've seen, especially recently. Like, is there an E.A.T score that's assessed for the domain? And really the answer there is no. There's no one single E.A.T score
like
that's
official
the domain level, right? That's, oh, this is quality or this is low quality.
Like it's a credit score. I can't look up my E.A.T score.
You can't look up exactly. It's a number of algorithmic processes that are being performed in the background, from page rank to content assessments, and we've already alluded to a number of those areas that essentially is, and they're aggregating the different quality assessments to basically assess how expertise, authoritative, and trustworthy content is, or a publisher is, or a website is, right? So that's really what we see is an aggregation of different algorithmic processes and less single score that Google is using to say this person's 66 out of 100 in E.A.T, right? That's not something that, at least Google's on record saying that. The SEO community is pretty much on board, agreeing with that, right? So if they could surprise us one day and say, here's your E.A.T scores. But
Right.
from everything that's out there, there's no single E.A.T score.
Yeah, kind of. Go ahead, Jake. Sorry.
I was just going to say that's well said. I think, as you had mentioned, we always try and not necessarily gamify, but I guess, in a sense, trying to quantify and, everything you can do to obviously rank better, right? That's what we're supposed to do. So I think, it's just a lot of it just comes down to best practices, just, doing what you would normally do of white hat SEO, while obviously taking these things into account. But as long as, you're doing your best at trying to establish the, E.A.T and every way possible, along with all the other ranking signals, as Michael said, there's a lists and lists and lists of everything you can do, but a lot of that is just your main SEO that you're looking at, as well.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. We talked before about, we dove into your money, your life, and how this comes into play a little bit previously. But I wanted to circle back around to that because the intersection between E.A.T and your Y, we'll just call it YMYL for now. Everyone knows what it is now, so YMYL. The intersection between those two is basically what computes to an increasing importance. Like you said, Michael, the threshold, the score required for those sites is more intense. The scrutiny of those is like, if it's kind of like saying like, hey, you're trying to get into this elite club, it's going to be harder to get into that club than say, oh yeah, you just pay the membership fee for 24-hour fitness. Well, it's like, no, you're trying to get into this elite club where it's like you have to go through all these series of things, right? And when it's any situation online where someone is going to be taking transactions, your money online, or they're advising you about what to do with your money, or they're sharing medical information, psychological information, like all those kind of things, I think it becomes, like you said before, it becomes so much more important. So, and I mean, we have talked about this quite a bit, but I think it's important because we work with a lot of clients in the medical industry. And so what are some of the things we can do if someone's in an industry like that, and in e-commerce and, all those different areas, like what is things that they can do? Yeah. What are things that they can do if they're in that category of YMYL, to really level up, so that they're meeting those higher thresholds?
Yeah, so I think it really, in these, I think ties in the best practices for all industries, right? We should all be focusing on trying to really just, create the best experience possible for users. I think that's what it boils down to
exactly
for me in my mind, is focusing on the user and what makes sense for them and the journey they're taking, and make sure you're providing them all the information they need, and really just making it the smoothest, best experience possible, right? And then ultimately you have the right end goal in mind, right? And then it's just the step A, B, Z to get to that end goal, right? So there are a number of factors. We've alluded to them some throughout the episode, but I'll highlight a few, and then Jake and Kevin, you can add some thoughts around some what you'd recommend if you're in the e-commerce industry or the medical industry and you're looking to really reinforce your expertise, authoritativeness, and trust with Google. So we talked about this one, and I'm gonna start it just because it's almost like checking the box for websites, but it seems so simple, but HTTPS, right? So security. So Google is looking at that not only for E.A.T, but they're also looking at that for page experience. They've stated they're looking at HTTPS security for page experience. So definitely make that something that you're taking care of for your site, and you're checking that you don't have your site accessible through HTTP and HTTPS. So kind of doing your due diligence and your technical audits there, right?
And a lot of people nowadays are aware of that. They get the big sign when they go to the site that says this is an unsecure site. And, in today's day and age of technology, most people know what that means. And I'm not putting my credit card information. I'm not going to purchase anything if the site says that. So definitely
I
first
100%
thing on the
agree.
box.
Yeah, and that ties back to what we're saying about users, right? Is like if users aren't going to trust it because you don't have that lock in the upper left, and it's not secure, your information's not secure, it could be hit by man in the middle attacks or a number of things, right? You're not going to enter your credit card information. You're probably not going to purchase from them. You might not even trust the content that you're seeing on the site. So that's definitely such a simple thing, but could be make or break ultimately in a customer's buying decision, and to trust your brand. Author pages, about us pages, that's an area where I think is not really thought, not enough strategies put in that area, or really enough focus is put in that area as far as really marking up your entity, facts about your entity, when you were formed, who the founder is, their connections with other industries or with other memberships in other areas, or their expertise, right? So about us and author pages, I think, are huge. So make sure you have those built out, and the nicer they look, the better they're able to communicate information, and the more they're able to build you as an expert, authority and trust in your given area, the more that impact that's going to have. So really focusing in on those author and about us pages.
Yeah, I think also if some of the things you were mentioning there, you could also find in schema markup that they're looking for, right? So you can look at a lot of that information that you could pull and insert that in there before you even do the schema markup. So
you not took, but that's one of my next ones. Is it was on the list, schema, right? Like if you want to connect the dots for Google, like Kevin and Jake were mentioning earlier, right? Those relationships, really how the knowledge graph operates, right? Connecting the entities, connecting the facts, and connecting those relationships, right? Schema is huge, whether you're talking about person schema, organization schema, local business schema, if you're talking about FAQ schema, the list goes on and on, right? That is a big part of Google helping understand how the different connections are made throughout your knowledge graph and their knowledge graph, and helping them form entity connections, and under that whole entity matching process, the named entity recognition process. Kevin alluded to this in a previous episode, which I've actually heard other people mention since then. Google essentially is using schema just like they're using the quality raters. They're using schema to assess their understanding of entities and relationships between entities, and basically benchmark it against their understanding of the content of unstructured data versus structured data in schema. So schema, on top of helping Google better understand things, is also kind of helping Google provide a better search experience to users, which is an interesting topic I never thought about previously. It's an interesting concept.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. A lot of good information there. I think some of my examples would be PR content is great, using that, as Michael had mentioned, for schema markup and linking. Would be good for showing E.A.T, and it's always, this may be simple, but just using the correct terminology, right? You even see that for getting sometimes featured for featured snippets, and using the correct terminology that you would have associated with medical terminology, or stuff to do with veterinarians or finance or whatever. Obviously, an expert isn't going to be using terminology that wouldn't be associated, or kind of some of that lingo and slang that you would see in that field.
Yeah, that's and apologize if I cut you off.
No, you're good.
That's a great call out. Is make this simple for Google, right? Clearly answer questions in a way that Google can understand. Like if you have a piece of content, and should be high quality content, like the theme of this whole episode, right? If you have a question called out in H2, you should be clearly answering that question in a way they're able to understand really easily and form those entity connections really easily. So if you're talking about how long does it take to recover from this surgery, right? Very clearly answering it right away is going to give you a better chance to rank and feature snippets and help Google better assess you as a quality piece of content, right? So how long does it take to recover from X surgery? It takes 48 hours to recover from X surgery, and you'll be back on your feet, right? That ties back to those connections on the knowledge graph and that whole that entity connection, which is called subject, predicate, object, or the relationship connections, right? Google is assessing content in a very similar way. They're making those entity connections on the knowledge graph. So they're looking for clearly connected entities in your content, and making it harder for them to read unstructured content to connect those entities is ultimately going to hinder your ability to rank well and rank in featured snippets and all that. So just make it easy for Google. That's a great call out there, Jake. Sorry to go down a little rabbit hole.
That's you hit the nail on the head there. So this was kind of something that I've looked into a little bit. In terms of if you don't have any great publications, you could also look at making like an ebook and getting that on Amazon.
Yeah.
Even you don't have to publish and go through the whole publishing a physical book and the costs associated with all that. You could actually go with a simple ebook on it and get that up on Amazon fairly easily, and you can get some credibility right away there.
Yeah.
And then
absolutely.
Yeah. And then another one that may not need to be harped on, but just looking at the quality of content. So doing your due diligence on pruning, and so I want to preface that first by saying, don't just start deleting stuff without looking at clear indications that it needs to be. But my advice would first be to see if you can go ahead and improve the content, make sure it's still relevant, of course, but you can improve it first, but just going through and, pruning anything that is deemed low quality content.
Awesome.
Yeah, I I love this because I'm like thinking through all these different things right now, and like I remember one of our current clients when we first they're a much larger hospital, and when we were going through this with them, because they're definitely in that your money your life section, as well as we're thinking about E.A.T and we're thinking about all these things, and how much it's funny how much strategy and operations and all these other things come into play with the ability to execute on creating the quality. So like in their case, we were pitching and eventually we're able to get them to actually do this, was we said they had 250 physicians. And we said, if they could just create one piece of content, because the way we were structuring the site was structured by practice area, and each practice area had its own kind of specialization area. And then we're like, if they create the content, we can automatically bring that content into here. And you can start creating these perfect relationships between these pages, not perfect, but like really well-structured relationships between these pages of, okay, this is all about, we'll just say it's in like pediatrics, and maybe it's cardiology. Pediatric cardiology is even a farther like down that tunnel, and you have the pediatric cardiology page, and then you have the actual pediatric cardiologists or them on those pages. And then when they create content, that content flows into that page, as well as like a main blog or something like that. And this whole concept of doing this was like, literally they can just create one, but we knew the biggest, this is where I love, like one of our strengths about SEO actually comes from emotional intelligence and psychology, and like understanding how to get shit done. because we said, hey, you're going to run into that. as like the way you structure this and communicate it out to the team is going to determine whether they actually want to do it or not. So you want to communicate it, but you want to already have like a certain group of authoritative physicians on board creating content, and then publish that, and then give recognition, lots of recognition to them about that. And everyone else will start going, oh, look, they did this thing, and they shared their expertise. So it's really, I find it so interesting to do that, because then all of a sudden people are creating content. The physicians are creating content because they're like, oh, this is cool. Dr. Howard, published this whole thing, and it got published, and it was shared throughout the company in the newsletter, and it was online on the social media and all this stuff. And, so it's interesting to understand like how you can bring this into your strategy and your overall really goals, but when you understand these things and align them effectively. And then I just wanted to touch on two other things that are in that intersection between Your Money, Your Life and E.A.T. One is the financial space. Like you have FINRA, SEC, different. I'm trying to think of some of the other.
HIPAA.
What's that?
HIPAA.
So that's on the health side, which
outside of yeah.
On the health side, you have HIPAA and high tech.
DSS, that'd be credit card related as far as.
So you have HIPAA and high tech on the health side, which like having a privacy policy and having that information clearly explaining what information you collect, like all those things come into that kind of trust factor. And that's also goes to the e-commerce side when you're talking about some of those other connections is, do you have a very clear policy on that? Do you have very clear return policy? Like all those different things build into that. But on the financial side, it's a very similar thing as well, is you have to have some of those certain things on your site that are right, because they're often required by the SEC. They're required in certain cases to have them, first of all. But then from a ranking standpoint, if you're providing investment advice, then Google's going to be looking for some of those things right out the gate. So there's a lot of those things in some of those industries, and that's why they're fairly heavily regulated, because people have done bad things, unfortunately.
I love your call out there for like the website architecture, how that can play such a huge role in really your ability to build topical authority, like you're talking about in our previous example, right? Yeah. Or, building out your corpus, your thematic document corpus of like a certain topic, right? It's all topical authority. It's kind of connected, right? So just your strategy can drive those E.A.T signals so much, right? If you have hundreds of different doctors publishing all medical related content, right? Like you're talking about, the freshness of that content's huge. Yeah. The amount of content, and then just the authority of the number of doctors there. I mean, those signals to Google could amplify really their understanding of your what you do and your business and the services you offer, and really create connections on another level. So that's an awesome example, Kevin.
Cool. So we've covered a ton, and I'd love to just finish up by just sharing. We can just kind of round robin real quick, and I'll just share what's one best practice that you'd recommend. And it doesn't have to be like the best. It could be what's easy to implement, or something you should just do out the gates if it's not done. Like what's your, and Michael, you're going to want to say more than one. Don't say more than one, because you're going to want to say this.
Don't steal mine.
Yeah, don't steal Jake's. Jake can go first, actually.
Yeah,
we'll start with Jake. We'll go to Michael. I'll end it up, and then we'll there. So Jake, what's your best practice you'd recommend people start with first? What's the thing they need to focus on?
In my mind, so it's already been touched on, but a little bit further is Michael had went over just the About Me page, and really getting the author box really established and set up that's easily aligned, and so Google can easily sift through it and decipher everything you need. So my best advice there would be to also go to like schema.org and kind of look at some of those and see all the things they're looking for and get those already established in there. Whether you do the schema markup or not, at least you have that's easily crawlable, hopefully. And then as time goes by, you can implement the schema markup, and hopefully that will be a good start.
No, that's awesome. That's great.
Great.
Michael.
My tip is from Jake's. Jake's over here for me. Hire us to do your schema markup once you get your information published. No, I'll take it back serious. Quality content. I mean, that's the name of the game, right? We shouldn't be trying to game Google because it's ultimately not going to be a good long-term strategy, and it's ultimately going to end up creating a bunch of, it's going to lead to penalties and filters and all sorts of things. So really focusing on publishing, think about the users, what's best for the users, answer their questions clearly, and try to create the best content you possibly can, right? Like give Google a reason to rank you number one. So if you should be publishing, I don't want to be corny here, but 10x content as far as what's ranking number one in that spot right now. So focus on users. That'd be my number one recommendation there.
You kind of added two in there. You slid. I knew Mike was going to slide those with quality content. I guess focus on users is part of quality content.
Yeah.
So mine would be. So it's tough trying to say just one because I'm like this. Have a strategic site architecture. So if you understand what your customer is looking for, which we can do very well, dive in and understand what are all the different keywords they're looking for. And if you find the intersection between what they're looking for and your business objectives and where there's alignment on those things, so you find that center of that Venn diagram, that's your sweet spot. And then you basically just do a gap analysis between your current site and the site architecture and this desired site, which would be best case where you're touching on all the things. You prioritize that and you start working towards building that site architecture. You create the high quality content that Michael's talking about, and you take in what Jake's talking about as far as building really solid about us, why you're authoritative, why you have expertise, and making sure that the people in your organization, you're also building up their expertise and authority and trust. And of course, I kind of took a few there. I think I might have added a few in. I broke my own rule.
It was great. It's a great tip. Yeah, no.
All right.
This was a fun episode. We covered so much. I mean, this is a great resource on E.A.T. So looking forward to getting this.
I really appreciate both of you guys' time, Jake and Michael, doing this. And for everyone else out there, thank you so much for tuning in, listening, and watching. Please make sure to subscribe and comment. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help. This is our passion. So thank you so much.
Bye. Yeah. Bye.
Bye.